Hello, my name is Alejandro, and today I'm gonna talk about some important things you need to know if you want to work in the Netherlands after your studies, particularly what we know as the orientation year. But first of all, let's put ourselves a little bit into context. I think we can all agree that the Netherlands is a very attractive place to live and work, and because of the growing economy, the high quality of life, etc. But as with a lot of countries around the world, the job market for third country nationals is regulated. And by third country nationals, I mean people who come from outside of the European Economic Area or Switzerland. In general, if they want to hire internationals, employers need to apply for a work permit for their employees. And to do that, they have to somehow prove that they did everything in their power to hire someone from within the European Union. This can be sometimes long, expensive, and cumbersome in general for them. So a lot of employers cannot do that. For highly skilled migrants, the situation is a bit different. There is a specialized residence permit, with which they can stay and work in the country without needing an additional work permit. But there are some conditions. One of them, a very important one, is that the employer has to be recognized as an official sponsor by the IND. This means that there is an actual list of companies that can apply for this kind of residence permit, and if they are not in there, they simply cannot offer this possibility to their employees. And another important requirement is that there is a minimum salary. This salary is age dependent. You can see it in the slide. Is close to 4.8 if you're 4.8k per month if you're 30 years or older, or if you're younger, this is close to 3.5k. These salaries are rather high. That is not normally a problem for people who work in very specialized industries, but think about students who just graduated, who do not have much experience in the job market. They are not really in a position to negotiate salaries in this range, and that puts them in a little bit of an unfair disadvantage. To help alleviate this a little bit, we have what we know as the orientation year, or also zoekjaar in Dutch. And this residence permit gives you free access to the labor market for 1 year after your graduation. And free access really means that you can do pretty much any job you like without thinking about salaries, number of hours. So you can have a job. You could do volunteering. You can start your own company, do an internship, pretty much everything you like. To get this kind of residence permit, you need to first graduate from a bachelor or master program in the Netherlands, or do research in the Netherlands, either a PhD, a PDN, a fellowship, a research fellowship, etc. Or you can even graduate from a top 200 university pretty much anywhere in the world. What is important to know is that this orientation year cannot be extended. It's only 1 year, but you can get another one once you become eligible again. For instance, let's say that you graduated from your master's, you take the orientation year, and once you finish your orientation year, you start a PhD. After you finish your PhD, you become eligible again for an orientation year, and this is a very good advantage. And another great advantage that this offers you is that, if you remember, there's a minimum salary criterion for highly skilled migrants, and with the orientation year, this salary is reduced to 2.5k per month. That makes you a much more attractive hire for potential employers. Now, I said that with the orientation year, you have free access to the labor market without needing a minimum salary, and that's true. But if you want to stay afterwards and you want to stay as a highly skilled migrant, you can make use of this reduced salary criterion. And important to know, your employer doesn't need to increase your salary once your orientation year ends. Now, how do you get it? Well, you can apply to the orientation year within 3 years after your graduation. That means that you don't have to do it immediately. A lot of people, for instance, decide to go back to their home countries, work for a few years, 1, 2, 2.5, almost 3 years, and then apply for the orientation year and come back to the Netherlands and search for a job over here. Now with more experience. You can also do it immediately. That's up to you. But you have 3 years to apply for it. Where do you do the application? Well, you can submit your application online if you are still living in the Netherlands and if you have a BSN number. Or if you're living abroad, you can submit your application normally on paper, sometimes online, but at a Dutch embassy or consulate in your country. You can ask them what's the procedure to do so. What do you need? Well, first of all, you will need your diploma. If you finish your program and fulfill all the requirements, but you still don't have your diploma, you can ask your university to submit a declaration saying that you finished everything and you're just waiting for your diploma to be officially handed to you. You will also need a valid passport, and you have to pay a fee of 192 euros. This is rather low. It was much higher in the past, so take advantage of this. An important thing, you do not need to show that you have the financial means to stay in the country. If you came as a student, for instance, you had to demonstrate that you could pay your tuition and that you could cover your expenses for at least the first year. With the orientation year, you don't need to prove any financial means, but you still need to be able to sustain yourself, and you cannot make use of any social welfare. Now, what happens with the COVID-19? Last year, there were some discussions about extending the orientation year because some people felt like the job market was not as good as usual, and they didn't have the time to obtain to get a job, right? The bad news is that there is no extension for the orientation year, but there were some changes, and these changes are mostly related to the lower salary criterion that I just discussed. Now, this is valid not only during your orientation year, but also within these 3 years after your graduation. So if you had it and you had to go back to your country, you can still use the lower salary criterion even if you apply from abroad, as long as you do it within these 3 years after graduation. And even if you get a job without using the orientation year, for instance, if you go straight from being a student to having a highly skilled migrant residence permit, you still can use the lower salary criterion within 3 years from your graduation, which is also a big advantage because you could save your orientation year for the future if you need it. Now remember, if you want to stay afterward, you will need to somehow get a different kind of residence permit. Normally, the most natural progression is to try to get a highly skilled migrant residence permit, but that's not your only option. If you start your own company, under certain circumstances, you will qualify for a startup visa or a self-employment visa. You can also start research, a PhD, PDN, fellowship, or you can at some point also qualify for another orientation year. If you still have more questions, if there's something that was not covered or you have specific questions, then you can always contact the community of alumni in the Netherlands. You can go to this URL that is in the slide. And you can also get in contact with us career ambassadors. There's people from all over the world with all kinds of backgrounds. So there's big chances that we will find an answer to your situation. That's it from me. I hope this was clear. Thank you for your attention.